So one of the other projects that I just kind of started here a while back was the turn signals, which when I first brought the car home, I did have turn signal. Then I started doing some more work, and then it seemed like I would lose turn signal after a while. And I did get a new flasher. That's the little guy sitting right there. And that flasher plugs into the, frankly, pain in the butt to get to fuse block. Now, right here, I know you can see that hanging down. This is the fuse block, and there's two screws that screw it up into the underside of the dash. It is a little easier to do the flash stat or flasher, I don't know if it's the flasher, with this removed, because the way it works is there's actually just kind of spade connectors in the back of it, and as you push your flasher into it, the tendency is for those spade connectors to push themselves out the back of the fuse block down here. So what you can do is, there's not much room to do it down there, but if you lay on your back and get your flasher positioned into the outlet device there, you can actually push your spade connectors on manually from the back side, and that makes for a very secure connection. Unfortunately, I already know that it has not, because I've already done this once and didn't get any results. I put it together very nicely, but I still did not have, well, I had flasher, I had left signal, right signal, that's good. I was going for it though, because right there, that little arrow right there is supposed to light up. There's a peanut bulb on the back side of it, and there's one also right there on the other side of the other dash there for your indicator on the inside, whether your turn signal is on or not. And no matter what I did, I could not get them to work. And I spent a considerable amount of time kind of going over the connections and the wiring diagram to get your interior bulbs to work. And it does require, you know, a little bit of mechanics on the inside of the steering wheel here in order to make that happen. So, you know, I checked a few connections at the fuse panel down below here, but I did not have any success. Everything does seem to be wired correctly according to the diagram there. And I have turn signal partially. I have the where it matters the most on the front of the car, left, right, and at the taillights, left and right. I'm afraid that, according to the wiring diagram, that there is definitely some connections that have to be done correctly on another switch here inside the steering column. If you trace the steering column down here, you'll see that a couple of wire cables come out that connect both to the bulbs and also to the fuse panel. But the interior connection inside the steering column is a mystery. So I'm willing to go ahead and, in the spirit of trying to get these little dinky little lights working on the inside, I'm willing to take the steering wheel apart. Let's see how challenging it is, and if I want to continue working on that just to get interior blinkers going. We'll see. Well, I've gone down an interesting rabbit hole here where I'm trying just to get my turn signal indicators to light up. Partially because I want the load on the flash stat or the flasher to be right, and you kind of need to have all the lights working in order for the flasher to flash at appropriate pace. And there's wiring that goes up into the steering column to the turn signal indicator here, and I want to make sure that it hasn't gotten rusted and I don't have a bad connection or something else goofy going on inside there, because there is supposed to be little flashing turn signal lights right up in here. So I've got this bezel just pried off of here, and it just latches into these three holes here with these tabs, and some long screws secure it. And I'm going to see if I can bend these two tabs right here on this lock washer and remove this nut and just take the steering wheel off without too much fuss here. and then we'll be able to see what I want to get to, which is the turn signal right below it there, to make sure that the wiring is not rusted and that we're in good shape there, making good connections for the turn signal flasher lights. So with a little bit of gentle persuasion, I was able to get this nut backed off here, and that's the horn button there, although I've got the battery disconnected. I didn't want that horn going off. So nut, and then this retaining washer comes off, and we'll see if this steering wheel comes off easy. Let's hope it does. Well, sorry to disappoint, but I got down to the point where it was time to remove the steering wheel, and it is on very tight, and it does talk about in the book that you may very well want to get a pulley puller, a 3-jaw puller, that you can put that nut back on there, get the hooks in on your puller, and then screw down and literally pull the steering wheel back off. I did pull, I gave it a try. I mean, you remove the bezel, the horn ring here comes off with just those 3 screws. That's not a big deal, and you're right there at the and you remove the nut, and then you're right there to pull the steering wheel off. But this is a flexible spoke steering wheel. These spokes right here are just kind of either welded or tacked on or made into a member. You really can't, tempting as it is to try and really crank on this wheel and lift it off and pull it off, you can't pull on these steering wheels and potentially break your spoke connection there. You really need to get a puller. I don't have a puller in my arsenal here, which I'll have to rectify. But rather than break something over something as small as indicator lights on the interior dash, I think I'm going to stop that project. Wait until I have the proper tool to remove the steering wheel, and then we'll go a little deeper yet into making sure those connections are correct down inside the steering wheel. And the switch and everything that's underneath there is a fairly complicated sandwich, so I don't want to underestimate this. I could tell from the diagram in the book that if you just start taking the guts out of the direction signal switch, you can wind up putting yourself into a lot of headaches here. There's cams that have to be adjusted so that your turn signal self-cancels. It is a self-canceling turn signal. You turn the wheel, and when it returns back, it does turn the indicator off. And some wiring down deeper as well, but it's just more than what I want to try to do right now indefinitely. I'm not doing anything unless I have the right tool to pull that steering wheel off. So we're going to abandon that project, and I'll just be happy with putting my fuse block back together under the car and having functional left and right front and rear turn signals and call that good. By the way, I did notice there was a lot of rust and a lot of dropped particles on the inside of the dash here. I'm guessing that potentially this is an easy spot for water to pool and collect on an outside parked car like this one, was for probably many years. And I also don't know if water can actually run through the seals in the molding and get behind there. So I was a little surprised at exactly how much rust and water there was underneath there. So we may have to check that out. This car is missing many of its seals that it's supposed to have, so we'll be checking out to see how waterproof it is one of these days. But sorry, everyone. Interior left and right turn signals are going to have to wait for some other project down the road. So we've had several weeks of Buick success where I actually got to take the car out. I took the parents for a drive around in it, which was fun. I've run a few errands in it. Got to drive it in a couple of, I guess you would call it, small parades where we've had, due to the COVID shutdown, some students who had graduated and didn't get a proper high school graduation, and the town and the fire department and the police, we kind of did some drive-by some houses. So the car has definitely stood and delivered, including idling in a line of procession of cars on a hot day. which certainly was, I suppose, a test of the cooling system, and we didn't have any problems or anything like that. Unfortunately, it seems, though, as time has gone on, the car just hasn't been running as well. A little harder starting, a little more hesitation upon acceleration, and some other things. The transmission's been working fine. That's been great. I think we're, maybe we turned a corner on that. And heating and cooling are great. Well, I don't have the heater hooked up, but there's plenty of heat available. But I think it's probably a smart idea right now to go ahead and take a look at the fuel system of the car. A much deeper dive than just the tank, making sure that's clean, and they call it a fuel sending unit. It's not really a sending unit. It's more of a fancy mechanical straw. The pump is on the motor up front. But in addition to a new sending unit, there's several other places on the car that need to be kind of checked on in terms of your fuel management. And of course, that's part of the basics of any troubleshooting on a car, is making sure you got, good, consistent fuel delivery. There, down here below, and we'll get to that in a minute, there's on the fuel pump, that little guy there, the combination vacuum pump and fuel underneath. There is a strainer basket on there, and that needs to be dropped on the bottom of it to taken off, and twice a year they recommend cleaning that out, making sure that any sediments getting caught there. In addition, I'm told that there is another strainer, a fine mesh strainer, on the carburetor itself. There's two models of carburetor here. There's the Carter and the Stromberg. The Carter has an external mounted filter strainer mesh that you can get to just by removing the air horn. But supposedly on the Stromberg carburetor, you have to remove the carburetor to get to it. So I'll be doing that. I'll probably be changing out this fuel filter, and even though that looks like a righteous and new fuel filter, I just don't, I don't know, because I didn't change it. So those are some of the basics that I'm going to be looking at today. And since I'm going to take the carburetor off, I may even look closer at going down the stack a little further to the exhaust manifold valve body mechanism, that contraption right there. There's a pretty good leak that I see happening right there at that joint. So the car, long story short, may be out for a little bit while I go ahead and do a deeper dive into some of these parts here. So let's just stop there and begin at the fuel pump, making sure that we have that strainer basket down there at the fuel pump is all clear. So, referring back to the manual, if you can see from this diagram here, there's a screw here at the bottom. Where's my finger? A screw at the bottom, a gasket, a bowl, another gasket, and a screen. That's what the goal is to get to. And as I read here, it says in the text off to the side, use a Z-shaped wrench KMO 655 model to remove the screw and gasket, and remove bolt, gasket, and strainer, blah, 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 blah. I hate it when they use the word special wrench. Never a good sign. Let's see what it is. So looking at the pump, and on the underside is everything that I need to get to and that you can't see. There's no benefit, it doesn't look like, to raising up the car and trying to get to it from underneath. There isn't really much space underneath there because of a structural frame element underneath it. There might be a handhold to get through on the underside. If I have to, I might have to use that. But let's see what we can do, what size nut it is underneath there, and let's see if we can get to it just from the top here. Looks like a 5/8 ratchet wrench is going to be our hero of the day. I am able to get on that nut underneath there, or screw I should say, and get some turns on it. So I'm going to take off this bottom and let's take a look at some parts. Well, life is a struggle. The bolt came out effortlessly. That was easy. This strainer bowl bottom did not. it was stuck on there really hard on the bottom. I had a rubber plastic mallet, and I was hitting on it from top side of the vehicle, trying to do the easy way, and it wasn't getting me anywhere. So fortunately, my dad has given me these are auto body pulling tools, hooks, but I've been using these a lot more to get into tight spaces, and I was able to jack the car up, go in from the underneath and hook this into the strainer basket from below and pull down really hard, and I was able to get up top. Not thrilled about what I'm seeing in here at first glance, because this is nothing but just crap with crummy ass pieces of gasket around there. So that means probably it's just not really been maintained in terms of that strainer basket, and I've got more to pull off of it yet. So let's hope that the rest of it comes a little easier. But anyway, let's keep going. So this will probably be a little hard for me to show because I'm looking down here filming on a mirror, and I'm getting a lot of reflection off of there. But yeah, that's picking up, it's focusing on the dust rather than the... Anyway, underneath there, that is a filter. There's a screen filter. That's that yellow thing that you're looking at. That actually looks almost clear from here. That's not a bad thing. It's cemented in place by that gasket there, and I'm having to, underneath here, I was picking at that gasket with a pick tool. That filter basket's probably glued in place by that gasket. So, end of the day, I'm going to have to keep carefully picking at that gasket, not to put a hole in that filter screen, and see if we can't get that to come out. Okay, so by using a little bitty screwdriver here, a pick to get the cork gasket started, this screwdriver working from the top side to very, very carefully go around there and pry the rest of that cork gasket out, I was able to get this screen out. It's not going to show up on the video that great here, but this screen is actually fairly clear. I mean, there's a few areas where I can see some deposits and some such, but I mean, this is not a screen that was like literally choking off fuel to the motor or anything like that. So we will clean it up. I'll make a new cork gasket, clean up this bowl, and we'll just reassemble that and call that a win. So getting to that gasket from the top side, it's just a little bitty channel in there, and there's not much to it. So anyway, I fashioned a little special tool here, Del Sigmund scraper tool. It's a common nail that I've bent and just ground down, but anyway, it's got a sharp little point on it now, or not a point, but more like a sharp chisel, so I can actually go around there and work that old gasket off from the pump. Anyway, I put a little bend on it so I can get to it. So that seems to be working pretty well to make it easier for me to get that old cork out. And so here's our final parts for cleanup and reassembly. So here's the bolt. I found this, there was a little washer on there that's supposed to be a gasket. I don't know if someone did that later or if it was not necessary, but I have a little O-ring, so I'm going to go ahead and use it as a washer. Then the cup and the gasket, and then this screen. It does actually have a little bit of a cone to it, if you could see, and that smaller circumference point goes down. But anyway, that just gets all screwed back in there, and hopefully it doesn't leak. I forgot to say, yeah, I had to make that gasket, so I don't know if they sell, they probably sell replacement gaskets for it, but I had a lot of gasket material here, so just traced it and made a new one. Alright, I had to kind of take a few days off here to get the rest of the fleet, the rest of the GM fleet running here, and now I think that the daily drivers are taken care of. I can go ahead and, in good conscience, come back to working on the car here. So where we left off, we had gotten the fuel pump screen bowl off and looked at that, and now I'm going to focus on the rest of the pathway of fuel here, coming up here to this contraption that someone made. There was at some point in time, at least according to the manual, a more permanent or structural filter that you could, with a sediment bowl in it and such, that you could probably maintain. I think that's probably long gone. But what I want to do is take this apart. I'm going to do a quick test just to see how much fuel is pumping up here to the filter. Make sure that's not an issue, and then we'll go to the filter, and then eventually I'll be working on the carburetor here. Alright, so what I've got here is the filter taken off. This is a tight fitting bit of clear hosing here, and I've got an empty gas can here. It's clean. It is completely empty, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the motor over and see just what kind of fuel return we get coming pumping up here to the carburetor. I'd say that was a pretty good fuel test. We had a lot of a good amount of fuel pumping very quickly to the carburetor. So by the way, I did go ahead and check the filter and the tubing that I took off to get to here. I was able to blow through that filter pretty easily there, so I don't think it was terribly plugged up or anything like that. So let's keep going down the path of carburetor here. Alright, so the next part of the disassembly will be taking off these terminal wires here on this vacuum switch. And this is actually what starts the car. When you push on the gas pedal, this lever winds up being, I'd almost have to do it from the other side. This lever drops down, and a little slide drops down in the bottom of here. And that slide drops down. There's a couple of contacts inside here. It slides down, bridging these two contacts. Once the engine starts, you develop vacuum inside the carburetor, and that lifts this slide down here back up, and that's how it doesn't crank while the motor's running and you're still doing the accelerator. But anyway, I'll mark which wire goes to which side and take those off. Alright, so the next step is to disconnect the throttle linkage right there at that nut right there. And I already have the wires off and labeled to the vacuum switch. That's what we call it. It's the starter, sort of, or the starter actuator. But anyway, remove the throttle rod. Next part is the choke upper heat pipe. That's just taking that nut off right there and disconnecting the pipe. And that's one of the parts I think I fixed originally, or one of the connections, yeah, right down there where it used to screw into the manifold. Anyway, it's coming off again. And right there, that guy I just disconnected is the vacuum advance on the distributor. So I repaired that as well, but now it's time to take it off, and it's out. And now it's removing the actual carburetor off, and it's only held on, it looks like, by 4 of those bolts nuts right there in each corner. So we'll get to taking those off next. Alright, so now we have carburetor lifted up and off. There's at least one gasket here. I think there was one on the underside of the carburetor too. I'm going to take this gasket off and kind of record this to make sure I keep my order correctly. Well, underneath that gasket there appears to be yet another gasket biscuit here, so I'll take that off as well. For my own clarity, this is the orientation that the gasket came off, and as you can see, there's actually 2 holes here that are different. They look almost irrelevant when you lay that down on this bottom sandwich here, but in case there's more importance to those than what I'm aware of, I need to remember that at least when it came off, this was the orientation, and the 2 extra holes were closer to the firewall. And indeed, it looks to me like on the bottom of the carburetor there is yet again another gasket that has been put here. I have no idea whether a triple gasket sandwich is normal or not, but this is what I have. with the orientation of those extra holes, again, towards the firewall. Well, I thought I was down to my last gasket, and as I was cleaning down the surface, lo and behold, I realized that there was yet again one more gasket. So off that one comes. Alright, that was the last gasket. I've got a couple of shop rags stuffed in those intake openings just so I don't drop anything down in there. And over here is my very thick gasket biscuit. I don't know if that's normal or not. So I'm done with cleaning, or the soak, and for this carburetor, because it was very old and I have questions about however much it's ever been cleaned, I did use acetone, which does a very good job at getting rid of very grimy, gummed up stuff. And as you can see, like down there in the bucket after I'm done, that's just all powdered junk, just literal dirt, grime, oil. And then that ring around there is additional collected gum, gas, tar, oil, everything. And the liquid that was left after the soak and cleaning was very nasty as well. So hopefully it's a lot cleaner. I'm going to do a little bit of a disassembly on it, I think, and see if I can't get a little deeper in here, because now I'm going to move on to a brake parts cleaner and seeing if I can't shoot out some of the channels and airways in there. And I may see if I can't find this additional strainer basket or strainer for fuel. And I'd like to check the float to see if it's got any pinholes in it, or if it's just not floating properly. Alright, so now we're going to move on to a little bit of deeper disassembly on the carburetor here. Got some Ziploc bags here to keep myself organized. I'll be writing some notes down about which bag goes to which part. And I'm going to start here with the manual with its instructions here on disassembly of the carburetor. So you got to get the accelerator vacuum switch off of it and the gasket. I'm sorry, I'm looking over here, but that's your switch and probably the gasket right there. The cotter pin and fast idle rod choke. So yeah, here's your fast idle choke. What else? And the pump rod from the pump lever. So I've got to push up on a spring housing, pull a rod outward here. I'm just kind of reading back from the manual. So I don't think that, I don't know how well I'll be able to document each one of these steps. I don't even know if it's possible to show a complete carburetor rebuild or disassembly with video here, but I'll try to pause as I go along the way and see if it makes sense. Plus it'll help me, in case I get lost, how some of this stuff goes back together. So here's the switch that just literally unscrews with those two screws right there, and a little gasket. And that's going to wind up just zip-locking these entire components and numbering them and putting them away. And I'll journal in the notebook here as well what I'm taking off. So now the fast idle lever need to be disconnected. Unfortunately, my little cotter pin broke. Little piece of wire right here. I'll have to remember that, and I'm writing that down. Then I'll put the part in my bag too, and then I'll disconnect this rod. So this rod was a little bit tight, but with a pair of pliers and squeeze, I was able to get it to come out without too much pressure. Next component is the pump rod, which is this guy right here. It had a little cotter pin behind, which I've already taken out. And the way you do it is you take it, lift up, and then pull out this rod. After the cotter pin's been removed, of course. I'm going to loosen this lever nut here a little bit before I take this rod out, because it's tight. And it does warn me that this is actually a left-hand thread. So fair warning to anybody disassembling, that's a left-hand thread. I've run into a problem that this screw right there, which is actually a very, very, very thin screw head, is completely rusted to the carburetor. Big, large surface area there for rust to grab onto, and I've tried soaking it with some penetrating oil and twisting with a screwdriver, and the hard part is this lever wants to twist with you, and you need to be very careful with this lever because I won't be able to replace this very easily. So I may need to actually put a little bit of heat on that screw head to see if I can't get it to expand and break whatever rust bond is on there and get it to loosen up. So this nut's being extraordinarily tough, and I can tell by the force that I was having to put on things I'm at risk for damaging stuff. Probably already bent the angle of this guy up just a little bit trying to get torque to make this go. So what I've done is I've disconnected this rod down here completely. There's a little cotter pin right here that it connects to, and I'll see if I can continue my disassembly and altogether avoid having to take this pump lever off at all. We'll see how it goes. So with this disassembled and free, I'm going to go ahead and I think if I remove these screws here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8 screws here, I'll be able to lift off the top component of the carburetor and avoid having to try to disconnect that. Okay, so I've got all 8 screws out. They are all the same length, they're identical screws. The gasket didn't want to give up, but I went ahead and got a little razor blade in there and just poked it around and wiggled it in there, and that finally broke the seal. So I'll have to stop videotaping, but I think I can basically remove the entire air horn component of it up and off the carburetor. I'm supposed to lift it straight up and do it carefully, so I'll try to do all that. Alright, so we have the air horn off, and I'm going to do a quick go over mostly for my own documentation. So here is the power pump lever actuator that was put through that hole there, and that end right there was connected to that rod that I was having such a tough time that I couldn't get off, that I just couldn't get the power pump rod off there. And it has put, I can tell by me removing it, there's a little bit of a bend in that right there. So I am going to see if it's possible to straighten that back out and also get that fulcrum rod put back together in a little better configuration without taking off that rusted screw head, because I just don't think I'm going to be able to get it off hardly. I would probably wind up having to grind it off or cut it off and then trying to find another left-handed screw to go in it, and it would be quite a little pain. But anyway, it's got a washer, a spring, another cap for a stiffer spring. Here's the gasket that rides down in this channel, right in there. And I'm going to put this in a Ziploc bag because some parts have, like this actually kind of fell out on me, which surprised me how easy it comes out, and I almost dropped that little washer right there at the very top. So I think it's time to get this guy safely back into a bag, and we will have to have this guy very straight when we were done, and we will work on when we go back to the disassembly, keeping this straight and not putting any levering whatsoever on it whenever we take apart the carburetor. This could be interesting. But anyway, into the bag it goes. One of my fears. The part did, because it had been bent and fatigued, did break when trying to straighten it back up. So I'll probably have to fashion another rod there to stick up and out, which I don't know if that'll necessarily be that big of a deal here, but this is just to videotape the configuration of the parts as they go together. And then I'll have to figure out, so I think that is just a rod. Let's see if that just comes out as a rod. No, I may have to work on that guy a little bit down there too. Alright, let's see how this goes. Well, unfortunately that accelerator pump piston that broke is too delicate of a part to actually fabricate. I'm going to have to try to get it replaced as a carburetor part. You can find them. The Stromberg carburetor on the Series 70 is this one here, AAVB-267, code number 789. You can also see those numbers stamped into the side of it here. It doesn't show up real good, but that's AAVB 267. So get on the internet and we will have to order another accelerator pump piston. Alright, back to the carburetor. So that's too bad about that accelerator pump piston that went right in there, because now that I've got this exploded here, I could have taken out actually just those 4 screws there, and you could have lifted the entire assembly out, including that accelerator pump piston, and you would not have had to try to do it like the manual was saying, which was to completely remove the arm and then remove the rod, and vice versa. You could have actually just taken the whole thing off, and then with lots of slack in it, very easily removed that accelerator piston. So that's too bad. That's usually following the manual works out well, but you can all benefit from my mistake now, so just go ahead and take those screws off and see if you can't lift the entire air horn off here as a unit. So I've got it does appear you can actually reorder. I've kind of got an email out, or I almost fired off an order here to buy a replacement accelerator piston. You can still get them, but darn, too bad. Well, I'm going to see if I can't inspect this float here a little bit here and make sure that it isn't filled with anything, that I don't have any pinholes. Let's see if we can get it off and do a little inspection on it. Alright, so using a little hammer I was able to tap this pin here. Has a little serrated end over here, and I'll be able to remove that float and inspect the float real good. So this little guy is a float needle valve. It was just sitting right in there, and it seems to be in good shape. It was moving smoothly, and there's a little rubber tip on there. So I'm gonna start cleaning out some of the holes in here with some brake cleaner and see how it does. So this may have been in my mind, I may never know, because I was outside when I was doing the cleaning, and as you can see I've got the float back installed here on the carburetor, but when I took that check valve out there and I was blowing from the inside and out here, I really wasn't getting great return, and then I stabbed the needle of my brake cleaner down into that hole where the float valve needle presses up against to, and it kind of maybe broke through a little bit, or I'm not sure what it might have done there, but I started getting a really good return of brake cleaner out from this orifice out into where the fuel comes in here. So maybe I had a piece of dirt or a piece of sediment that was almost acting like a little bit of like a check valve, or slowing down the flow of fuel into the carburetor. It'll be hard for me to tell. But I've cleaned this all out here really good. And of course there'll be a good fuel filter going on here whenever we have new fuel going in. So maybe that was part of my component. There's several little orifices down in here. There's one right here to the power piston. A couple, 1, 2 more orifices right there that you need to have cleaned out. But anyway, they're all good and flowing very freely. So for the next part I'm probably going to be bold, and I'm going to actually just go ahead and see if I can remove these 1, 2, 3, 4 screws right here to remove the main body from the throttle body component. There's a lot more disassembly that they talk about you could do in the manual here, but having kind of learned a little bit from here, the components are actually fairly simplistic once they're actually installed in here, and I think that this body was actually meant to just screw on and off and have gaskets replaced maybe, and just have the orifices cleaned out. So I'm going to go for it and just remove that and see if it gives me better access to cleaning out these orifices in here. So this surprised me a little bit. There's these 2 rods here. They're just wires. sticking out of the throttle body, threading up into these two holes right here. That was the only thing that actually connected as I took the 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts apart, or screws apart there. So I'll have to remember that these thread up into here, and they actually have a little bit of an angle on them too. They're unusual. So kind of the shorter end going down into here, shorter end, and the rest of that threading up into here, no doubt engineered for a certain amount of space for venting. But we'll get these things all cleaned out here. Alright, I'm pretty pleased again. So as I was doing some cleaning here, there are several orifices. You can see your main jet down in there, and it's going to be hard to show, but in case somebody wanted to know what they were talking about, that fine mesh thing right there, that is the strainer. That's a fuel strainer right there on the right side. You can see the main jet there on the left. So that's a strainer that I wanted to get to at least look at, but I can tell you from looking at it, and I've shot brake cleaner through, it was clear. It was clear already. So that's another check valve there for deep down in there. I don't think it's going to show up very good, but there's your main jet. Mine has a number, hold on, I'll read the number to you. It's not going to focus on it. Number 56. Number 56. Okay. So I was able to get brake fluid shot in these two little vent orifices here, which got return eventually on this one. This one seemed to be sluggish, to be honest. Both from here compared to this one, which was the return was almost immediate from this vent. This one over here was a little slow. And I was able to get a nozzle of brake cleaner straw onto the main jet, and after some shooting through there and getting a little bit of return through here, this one always seemed to return well, and continuing to clean through the vent and through the main, I finally got equal return on both sides here, including on the left one here. And there's several other orifices that you can go ahead and get to. These two right here, that's actually a vent right there, and that's a little vent right there. See if I got anything. Oh, on the inside, or on the other side here, right here, right here, and here, for the little place where those wires on the throttle body are going to go through. I did not remove the idle jets. I didn't seem to have any problem with idling, so I don't think that that's been an issue, but I definitely seem to be having more issues when I was trying to accelerate and get up to speed. So I may have had some plugging going on here on this side over here. I think I did. Oh, I didn't show it, but yeah, the floats seem to be working. They don't seem to have any liquid in them, no water in them, no nothing. When I shook them, I actually submerged them in some water to see if I saw any bubbles coming. I didn't see anything like that. Power piston here is working good. I think I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and reuse this gasket. This gasket right here seems to be in pretty good shape. So, so does this one here. So, yeah, I should flip it over. So that's the gasket that I'm talking about. So I think what I'm going to do is just stop, see if I can get it put back together, except of course for the accelerator pump piston, and I'll have to wait and see how it runs when I get that back in. Okay, so I've got the carburetor kind of reassembled lightly here. I didn't crunch any of these screws here down hard. I just don't like having loose parts around, and really there wasn't too much to the disassembly. It's just a darn shame that I didn't know that it was possible to actually just take this entire top body off of here without having to mess around with this vacuum, or not vacuum, power piston that just gives you an extra shot of gas whenever you put on the gas pedal. But I definitely think I saw a poor return through one of the two mains there. So I'm slightly optimistic between that, or maybe clearing out maybe even a little bit of stuff up here in the main. It's hard to say that when I get my part in that we might have a better fuel delivery going on to the car. But now we just have to wait until the parts come in. So I figure while I'm waiting for the carburetor part to get here, I might as well have it out with this device that's been a little bit of a source of dread for me, and it's this exhaust valve down here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, which you can't see, and 5, which you can't see, bolts, nuts holding it in. And I'm sure it's fairly rusted. It looks like someone probably tried to do a permanent close or something like that. We think it's in that position, but maybe they didn't. Maybe it's open. Maybe it's in the wrong direction. I just don't really think I can tell unless I unfortunately take it out to see what this looks like. I think the good news is this can be done without having to remove the intake or exhaust manifolds, because I really don't want to do that. That would just take the car out for even longer. So let's see how I do with getting some of these nuts and bolts off. I've got them soaking in a little bit of penetrating transmission fluid acetone mixture. So and maybe looks like someone has changed a nut, maybe over here. So there's a chance these have actually been taken out, or maybe there's been some work done on it. I'm not sure, but let's see how it goes. Well, fortunately, I think I've had some success here. As you can see, I got those two bolts off there, and the exhaust on its own is dropped down. I've got the bolt up here removed, and both of them that screw into, oh gosh, I get topsy-turvy whether it's intake or exhaust on the system here. But anyway, the two bolts holding the exhaust valve in seem to have come out okay. And I'm going to tap and move around on this valve body and see if I can get it just to drop off. Well, as usual, things are a little more complicated yet, because as I spy on the back there, I think I see, yeah, one more bolt on the back side of the body. Because the valve wasn't just coming off easy or falling off there. So I do believe that one's going to have to come out too. Let's hope that it does. Alright, this might be a little awkward to describe. I'm going to try to do it as best as I can and demystify this exhaust manifold valve mechanism and how it works here with the car. So as you can see, I got it off. It was not horribly hard once I had it figured out how the thing came off. Anybody watching this is going to really benefit, I think, by seeing how one comes off with someone else doing it, because then you know exactly which bolts are going to have to go. But I thought I'd spend some time here while it's off and kind of go through some other parts, and then we'll go over to the manifold valve itself. So as you can see down below, it is a triangular 3-bolt hookup. And I don't know if it's going to show up very well or not, but that ring, or that round opening right there, is recessed in. There's a pilot ring, just a little circle, that fits halfway into there, and then halfway into your heat riser valve. It's called a heat riser in some places that you look at, or exhaust manifold valve. But that's how it connects there, partially by those 3 bolts there in the back. And I'll quit talking about the bolts because I'll show you that on the riser. If you can see that tube sticking down there, that tube actually continues through and sticks down below. You can't see it from here, but I'll go around. Let's see if I can focus in on it to where you can see it. Bear with me while I get myself oriented again. Alright, there's the top of it. That's it right there. That black thing you can't see, that's actually the end of that tube with a little narrow kind of slit cut off on it there. It passes through. So as exhaust passes over that tube, it warms up the tube, and there must be a little bit of suction perhaps, or maybe it's not required. I would have think you'd have to pull a little bit of air, you know, cold air underneath passing up through the exhaust and then going into your carburetor at the top, to the, which I guess since I have the carburetor out, I'll walk over here to it. So the top of that big tube you saw sticking out, good filming though. Top of the tube comes around, connects into here, and this is registering the heat coming off of it, and this is opening or determining what your choke step is going to be. Here's your choke cam, and it's got little teeth on it right there, different steps, and this will keep your throttle open more or less depending on where, how up or down this is going. So it's kind of important that mechanism here be pretty loose and free. But anyway, that's how your carburetor is registering how warm the engine is, so to speak, and determining whether it's going to be here at practically full choke or less and less, and then somewhere around there is kind of the choke disengaged. It all depends on those little teeth right down there. They don't show up very well, but that throttle stop, depending on where it contacts there, determines your amount of choke. Alright, enough about that. But you get it. Heat riser tube going into that carburetor. I didn't understand the heat rising up into this kind of boxed contraption here, which is your intake manifold, and here you can see you got an intake and an intake, and everybody gets an intake here. I thought you'd be able to peer down through here and see through into the heat riser, but you can't. It doesn't work that way. I'll show you here. It's very much a flat bottom underneath there. What you have on the underside here is I can put my, I won't be able to videotape it, but you'll have to trust me that you can put your fingers up underneath here and you can feel the underside of those tubes. The cast iron tubes of the intake manifold. So what it does is that heat riser allows warm air to circulate kind of around these intake manifolds and help them warm up. And it continues on
down. I got a rag stuffed in it so I don't drop anything down the exhaust there, but down into that exhaust. But this is basically mostly just a heat box with some tubes around it, and like if I put my finger there, it hits a hard stop. It's because the tubes actually turn that way and that way, that way and that way. So now I'm going to move on to the heat riser itself. Well, as you can see, actually down here, by the way, this is where I did notice there was a little bit of a leak. So I've got a loose here. You can see this flange that lifts up on the exhaust, trying to mate this interior surface ring here to the underside of the heat riser. And this pipe has just been kind of chopped off right there. And it wasn't a really good fit. I would notice a little bit of exhaust coming around there, and I don't know how good I'm going to be able to do with that. I'll have to clean a lot on that, and I may have to do some type of gasketing, something or other, but that's going to be the goal, is to try to get that exhaust to pull up nice and tight to the bottom of the heat riser or the exhaust manifold valve. Okay. Let's step away for a second and go over here to the beast itself. That's it. And I'm going to pull a light over here so we can see it a little better. Alright. So here's the cheeky little devil itself. I'll go through these bolts briefly in case anyone else ever has to take one of these off of a Buick. I think that whether you're on a 70 series like this or a special or super, they probably all had very similar heat risers, and shared. It might be different sizes, but I think the concept was the same. So you got to be prepared to take 8 bolts out altogether. So these two right here were the ones that sandwiched it up to your exhaust. And they, just washer clamp from top and bottom. That's pretty straightforward. This broken ring right here is the pilot ring I was talking about. I don't think it actually matters so much that it's broken right now, or at least when it was installed in the vehicle, but that is to make sure that you line up your heat riser correctly when you mate it up to the exhaust. So, right now in the position I have it, this is like, if you're standing by the car, this is the true position of what you would see with a heat riser, with engine over here and exhaust coming in through here, and this bolting up to your exhaust, and it would pass back and through. So here are your 3 bolts that went through here. 1, 2, 3. I was so happy to see that there was yet a 3rd bolt behind there. And by the way, maybe that explains it. It was not grabbing at all, and I don't know if they stripped that out and tried to do like a helical coil fix or what's happened there. Something's going on there, and I don't know what, but I'll have to sort that out. I was prepared for misery, and the bolt itself was hardly grabbing anything. And then there are these 2 bolts that you actually access from the top, and they screw in right here like that. And I was perplexed because they're different bolts. In fact, one had a metric head and one was a standard head. So someone's done some amount of work on here, maybe replacing some exhaust or trying to get the valve working differently, or just checking it and running into problems while they were working on it. But it is a total of 8 bolts that have to be removed before you're ever going to get this valve body or heat riser out of the car. And I was trying to get it off after 6 because I was like, surely there can't be any more holding this on, but there was. It was the 2 long ones, and the 2 long ones come in from the top and go right through there. So anyway, I've passed on the knowledge to somebody else. If they ever want to take one of these off, then you can go ahead and know what you're up against. And that's half the battle. So now let's look at this riser itself. Believe it or not, I was stunned. It's free. To a certain degree, it was working. Now, I can't tell you because I was beating on it a little bit with a hammer just to loosen it up. When I took it off, it looked like it was about in that position. And as you can see, there was a little bit of daylight going through there. So I really couldn't tell you exactly on this car what position this was. If it was stuck in a certain position, it felt stuck. It felt absolutely welded in one position. And to be honest, I think it was in probably a mostly closed position. You'll see this valve on this exhaust bolt. There's a bracket sticking off of it, and that spring there, that's called the anti-rattle spring. That was to keep some level of tension on this, rather than having it just rattle around all the time. Probably made some noise. Maybe a clang like that, I'm not sure. Or maybe it was a clang open. Rather, just kept it more of a neutral. I can't tell if this is the natural position of this or if it was bent, or even if that's the original spring to it. But as you can see, it actually moves not too bad. Not too bad. It's really rusty. This entire unit is just completely rusty. So I think I'm going to wind up sitting it in some evapor-rust for a very long time and letting it kind of sort itself out before I move on to reassembly of it here. So I'm surprised it's working, but it is. I will completely de-rust this in evapor-rust as much as I can. It's not really a perfect sealing device. I kind of thought it would be a little tighter tolerances and clearances, but it's just kind of your, it's just kind of a mostly closed, kind of a helper valve here. But it's not meant to be. It does not provide a a perfect seal by any means around when it is fully closed. I'll have to look back at my own video, but like that is about the orientation of that counterweight there if it's fully closed. So I don't think mine was. I think it was more like probably a partial. And I did feel the carburetor after some of my rides when I was driving the car around, and it gets very warm. The carburetor gets quite warm, almost to the point I was worried that it might be boiling the gasoline in it. I don't know how hot that actually has to be in order for that to happen, but I do know that while it's warmed up, you would probably want this to be just as closed as what you could get it. So I'm going to have to play around with this device here for a little bit to figure out exactly what I want to do with it. But it was really hard to look at the diagrams to kind of sort out where things should be, in relation to when the car starts and it's cold and it's warm. But this is a cold start, where all the exhaust is coming straight up, going around our heat box. But basically we're just heating up the intake tubes themselves, which are cast iron, and then that same exhaust gas is then going down through this slit and carrying out through the bottom to the exhaust pipes. And as this heat riser warms up, and as this spring, I mean, this is what's providing the tension, this wound spring right here, as this heats up, I'm assuming that spring begins to relax and this begins to creep, you know, relax and become more and more and more until it's finally in a closed position, or mostly closed position. So I'll lubricate that really well when it's all done. I probably will install it back when I'm done. If you wanted, if you were concerned about it, and you wanted to see if you could get it, you know, to where it was not heating up the carburetor, this forward is the correct orientation to close that valve kind of off to the carburetor and direct most of the flow downward to the exhaust pipes. And then I suppose at a more extreme level, you could even do a heat riser delete, so to speak. Possibly if you could find a material that was thin enough to go on top of here, you could probably close that off, and then all of the exhaust would would have to direct downward. Although you would still, if you were going to do that, you would want to either remove this blade or have it kind of permanently put in the forward position. I don't know how much faster your car warms up in the wintertime, for instance, by using this. I'm sure even on mildly cool days or even warm summer days, the faster that those tubes heat up, the intakes heat up, the quicker your car is going to carburate well. Obviously, the engineers thought it was important to maximize your fuel economy, to get those intakes warmed up as soon as possible, because the gas does definitely volatilize and atomize better in those warm intakes. So anyway, this is a pretty good day's work for getting it off without breaking anything. The mysteries that have to be solved will be sorting out these mismatched bolts up here to the top, and the almost no bite, no connection, no thread grab on that bottom guy there, which is either stripped out or needs tapped out again. I'll have to kind of sort that out. But anyway, that is the heat riser, I think, to a large part demystified.